Bienvenidos a Gobierno, Cultura y Sociedad por Canadá Latin Channel. Les saluda con el gusto de siempre su amigo y servidor Héctor Chaparro, transmitiendo desde Calgary, Alberta, Canadá, para todo Canadá y para Latinoamérica. Gracias a todos por seguirnos y por estar en sintonía de esta plataforma digital Canadá Latin Channel, donde le traemos contenido de calidad e importante para la comunidad latina. Así que no se despeguen porque tenemos una entrevista muy importante que vamos a tener el día de hoy. Pero antes de comenzar, quiero invitarte a que si no te has suscrito en nuestras redes sociales, si aún no nos sigues, pues vaya si lo hagas. Estamos como Canadá Latin Channel en nuestra página web. Nos puedes buscar en Facebook, en Twitter, en Instagram, en YouTube. También, pues comparte el contenido para que más gente pueda enterarse de lo que vamos a presentar y del contenido que nosotros aquí presentamos. Comparte este contenido antes de que el gobierno nos pueda, pues, poner alguna restricción de contenido, ya que esta nueva ley que se acaba de implementar, pues no sabemos, pero estamos a la expectativa. Y específicamente de esto también vamos a hablar con el senador Leo Housakos, quien estará con nosotros en un momento. Pero bueno, comparte este contenido para empezar con esta entrevista. ¿Y quién es el senador Leo Housakos? Bueno, antes de presentárselo, quiero decirles que Leo Housakos es senador por Wellington, Quebec, desde el 8 de enero del 2009. Él es miembro del Partido Conservador. Housakos fue designado por consejo del primer ministro Stephen Harper, quien se desempeñó como presidente del Senado durante parte del 2015. En octubre del 2012, el senador publicó Los desafíos de la integración y el multiculturalismo, donde expresa su preocupación por las dificultades que han tenido los inmigrantes recientes para ser aceptados e integrados en la sociedad norteamericana, y más específicamente los desafíos que enfrentan las comunidades musulmanas después del 11 de septiembre. Y sin más preámbulo, quiero invitar a que escuchemos esta entrevista que le voy a realizar al senador Leo Housakos, quien se encuentra con nosotros desde Ottawa, y aquí quiero darle la bienvenida. Senator, thanks for being here in Canada Latin Channel. Welcome.
Thank you for having me on the show, Mr. Chaparro.
Thanks a lot. And I know, Senator, you have a lot of, you are busy, and I appreciate the time you have to explain us a little bit what's going on in Canada. I have a lot of topics on my head, a lot of things going on in Canada. But first of all, I want to ask you about this bill, who is already a law. It's the bill S203, who is respecting the federal framework on autism spectrum disorder. What exactly is this, and how important is this for all the Canadians?
Well, actually, it's one of the bills that I'm the most proudest of. I'm already serving in my 15th year in the Senate of Canada, and S203 is just that. It is a bill, a law that's calling on the government to put into place a national framework on autism spectrum disorder. Essentially, the bill is giving the government 18 months to bring together all stakeholders, community groups, the ministries of health right across Canada, at a round table to discuss autism, to discuss the need of the autistic community. We all know that it's been many years and the problem of autism has been growing. There's 1 in 48 births. And our country, like many countries, is lagging behind in terms of early diagnosis, in terms of support to families that are dealing with young children who are diagnosed with autism. Our public schools don't have enough infrastructure and financial support in order to give the special care to these children. So I've been advocating for autism for a very long time, and governments have been passing the buck back and forth between our federal and provincial governments. It's important once and for all that all governments, all politicians, they sit around the table and we come up with a national strategy to give support to families dealing with autism. I believe that autism is an affliction that someone has, and at the end of the day, it's something that we need to learn to hone as a society. Because if we leave young children and people with autism behind and not part of our development as a society, we will not reach our true potential. So that is really the goal of S203.
Excellent, and a good initiative, Senator, because we know this disorder. It's not very common, but a lot of families are struggle with these kind of things. So thanks for that.
And,
Um,
and it's becoming more and more common. So
okay.
yeah, it's 1 in 48 births in 2023. If you go back 10, 15 years ago, it was 1 in 88 births. So if our listeners aren't touched directly by this yet. Unfortunately, you will be. And I keep saying we need to be ready to support these families.
Excellent, excellent. Good, good to know about that because we had before a few emails regarding about programs. What's federal government or provincial government is doing about this kind of disorder. But this is a good news for all the people, all the Canadians who have this kind of people with that disorder. Thanks, Senator. Something else you want to add about this topic? Because I want to start in another topic a little bit harder.
No, let's take them one by one.
Perfect. Awesome. Appreciate. Senator, a lot of things are going on in Canada right now. First of all, we had a pandemic, and Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, he put a mandate for vaccinations. Right now, he says he never pushed the people to vaccinate. It's like it's confusing that answer he's telling us right now. Anyway, after that, we have that emergency act against the Freedom Convoy, right? So again, a lot of bad stuff about this government, liberal government. And right now, on top of that, the cherry of the cake, I can tell, is this bill C11. So the Pablo Rodriguez, who is the improver of this bill, who put on the table, and he put that to restrict somehow all the content we create, the creators we create here in Canada, we will be under the view of the CRTC, who it's not a good stuff because uh, if they can ban us all the content we create. This is a bad thing. And my question is, Senator, how bad or how good is this bill, and what can we do to if it's the case is bad? I said before because I read a lot, and it's bad for all the creators like me, like Canada Latin Channel. And what is exactly it does mean for us and for Canadians? This bill is not the good way to see what exactly we need to see in Canada.
Mr. Chaparro, you've touched two very important issues, two big issues. One of them, of course, was the Emergency Measures Act in Canada, which was forced upon protesters here in Ottawa by Prime Minister Trudeau. We all, right around the world, went through this terrible virus called COVID-19. Thousands and thousands of Canadians died, particularly vulnerable and senior citizens. We let them down from coast to coast to coast in this country because governments did not react quickly enough, and more importantly, they didn't react appropriately enough, in my point of view, to take care of the most vulnerable. But Prime Minister Trudeau, what he did during COVID-19 was the most despicable of all. I think he tried to take advantage of this terrible virus for political gain. He did what he likes to do, which is divide Canadians between us versus them. He created this political narrative of those who were taking vaccines and getting vaccinated were good, responsible citizens. Those that were not vaccinated, they were irresponsible and somehow bad. And of course, he figured he can demonize them for political expediency. And there's nothing wrong, nothing worse, and nothing more wrong for a prime minister than to take advantage of a public health crisis to try to play petty politics. I'm vaccinated. I believe vaccines are an important part of mitigating the virus and going through COVID-19 the way we did. But I also believe in fundamental freedoms. I believe that Canadians should have the right to choose if they want to take a medical procedure. Canadians have the right to decide for themselves if they want to inject themselves with a vaccine or not. You're not evil or a deplorable or some kind of bad person because you don't want to take a vaccine for a variety of reasons, either for health reasons or for lack of trust and security in the vaccine, or because you think you're healthy enough and young enough and you can overcome it. So the Prime Minister put into place very bad public measures. And then, of course, they try to demonize truck drivers who spent hours and hours working in a truck in solitary confinement. And somehow, if they weren't vaccinated, they would spread the vaccine from coast to coast to coast. These same truck drivers who at the beginning of the pandemic were considered heroes by the prime ministers went to zeros because many of them didn't want to get vaccinated, or many of them saw the political evil in terms of what the Prime Minister was trying to carry out, like I said, by dividing Canadian citizens. And then the cherry on top was once Canadians protested in terms of hundreds of thousands who came to Ottawa, which is a democratic right. One thing we cherish in our democracies is the right for people to criticize their government. I, as an opposition politician, senator in Canada, it's my duty, not just my right, but my duty to hold the government to account and to criticize. And Canadian citizens and Americans and all of us living in Western democracies, we hold that value so dear. And the Prime Minister, again, instead of sitting down and listening to the variety of concerns that these protesters had. Some of them were with mandates, some of them were about vaccines, some of them were just a manifestation of people fed up with this country, borrowing money and creating inflation and all various degrees of concerns that Canadians had. And the Prime Minister, what did he do? He exercised the most draconian, desperate emergency law. That's why we call it the Emergency Measures Act. Actually carrying out what you expect from police states, investigations, freezing accounts of Canadian protesters, creating operations where they were seizing vehicles and towing vehicles from the Canadian capital, bringing in police forces in order to bully and arrest protesters, what were clearly peaceful protesters. So that's number one. It was a dark day in Canadian history, Mr. Chaparro, when this government put into place the Emergency Measures Act. I'm very proud that many senators, we fought back in the Senate of Canada. And before we even had a vote in the Senate of Canada on the Emergency Measures Act, I think within a week of this government putting it into place, they withdrew it. Thank God. But nonetheless, the fact that a government felt that they had to go this far for something so little calls into question their judgment and calls into question their commitment to civil liberties and freedom. Now, and of course, it brings us into the second subject you asked, C11. Again, the Trudeau government claims that this bill was brought in order to make sure that streamers and digital platforms pay their fair share in order to support Canadian culture and broadcasters. Of course, when you look carefully into this bill, what it actually does is it's trying to bring digital platforms into the old days of doing broadcasting. Nothing more. It's actually forcing the CRTC and a bunch of bureaucrats to decide what Canadians can post, what they can view on the internet. And again, it seems that this Trudeau government loves to infringe upon fundamental freedoms.
So what does it mean for us, Senator, as creators, content creators? Are we under the view of the CRTC, who that means is the government? So that means probably we can't share our thoughts like we are doing it right now, criticizing the government or something like that. Are we in jeopardy? We won't speak like that.
We are all in jeopardy when a government in a law gives the complete right to the CRTC to determine what Canadian content is. It gives bureaucrats the authority to give the CRTC directives in terms of outcomes they want vis-a-vis Canadian content. This bill also gives the CRTC full authority to force platforms like Google, like Facebook, like Meta, all these digital platforms in order to control their algorithms to come to a determination of what they might consider Canadian content or not. For example, if they decide that this particular broadcast and this particular show isn't Canadian enough, they can actually tell platforms to lower the algorithmic priority of the show so less people watch it. It also gives them the authority to increase using and manipulating algorithms and forcing these platforms to give priority to certain podcasts, certain shows, certain language. Again, when we get into that slippery slope and the CRTC says, trust us, we're not going to scope in user-generated content. The government says, trust us, we're not going to scope into this law digital creators. But every time in the House of Commons, every time in the Senate, we try to move concrete amendments to put in the law black and white the removal of user-generated content from this particular law and the potential outcome, the government kept refusing those amendments. So on the one hand, they said, trust us, we would never use this law in that way. On the other hand, they refused the amendments. Now, I want to highlight when we use the terms user-generated content or digital-first creators, we're talking about people that are on Google, that are on YouTube, that are on streaming, that are on Facebook, all these Twitter, all of these platforms where we today in 2023 have the ability to post interviews, shows, videos, documentaries, songs, anything we create as Canadians. We have the world at our fingertips. We have the world on our phones, on our iPads to be able to communicate at a broader level than ever before. All of a sudden, one day, and if this government is trustworthy and they don't use the bill in that law, who says future governments are trustworthy? I, as a legislator, I'm always concerned when I give so much authority to any bureaucrat and any government, particularly when it has to do with free speech.
And Senator, the question here is, where is the freedom? Canada supposed have the freedom to talk about everything, that freedom to speech. And with this kind of thing, the CRTC will be banished somehow, and we can tell us what exactly we need to say. Is that right?
100%. The CRTC will determine, for example, maybe this show isn't enough Canadian content, in their opinion, in order for your algorithmic priority to be higher than what they consider to be Canadian content. Furthermore, we just had recently this weekend at the Liberal National Convention right here in Ottawa, the Liberals voted on a motion where they are claiming that there should be an agency, or the government should have a final determination on what is legitimate information and what is disinformation, which is outrageous to think that in 2023, a motion at a National Liberal Party convention highlighting such authority and such power on freedom of speech. Who in government will determine what is accurate information or disinformation? When governments and political parties start talking like that, they're no longer interested in a free debate where you disagree with what I'm saying. Come on this show, invite me on other shows. Let's have an open and frank debate. But in order to try to use government levers to shut down debate, that is the most disingenuous thing that any government can do. And again, C11 really raises my antennas. When I see motions that were just passed in the Liberal Party convention, which is calling into question the freedom of the press, their ability to work with anonymous sources in order to basically put out stories on the government without having to feel that they can be attacked or reproached through some kind of law or through some political agency.
Well, we will see what happens with this law. Who it's not working for us.
Let me just say this. You asked what do to stop C11. Well, first of all, we can't sit back and watch this happen. We need to be vigilant. And I have to highlight the Conservative Party led by Pierre Poilievre, who for him, freedom of expression, freedom of speech, freedom of the press is non-negotiable, has made it clear that a Poilievre government, the first thing they're going to do is repeal C11. So I call upon all Canadians who don't want to even have a discussion or a negotiation, because these fundamental rights, we had people in World War II go halfway around the world and give up their life so we can live in this country and live in the Western democracies with freedom. So non-negotiable, no element of risk should ever be taken when it comes to protecting those freedoms.
Well, as I said, we are sad about this decision, but nothing we can do. Just if a politician like you, Senator, could put this, against of this mandate, would be great, and support all the creators and all the content. But anyways, we will see what's going on in this country. Senator, I have a few feedbacks of the Latino community in Toronto, in Montreal. So my second question is, why you have this affinity with the Latino community? You are easygoing with the Latino community.
They love me and I love them. I guess because we share a lot of common values. I'm a son of immigrants. My mom and dad immigrated to Canada in the 1950s, and like most immigrants that come to this country, which when we say most immigrants, all Canadians were either immigrants or children of immigrants or grandchildren of immigrants. We come to this country for opportunity and for freedom. We leave countries behind that don't afford us that. They are countries that trample on democracy, trample on freedom. They don't, as a result, and if you don't have freedom, you will never achieve free enterprise. You will never achieve the opportunity for human nature and human ingenuity to flourish. So the Latino immigrants that come to Canada, unfortunately, come from some countries in Latin America and South America that don't have the best track records when it comes to democracy and human rights. So I guess my love for these democratic values and freedoms and their love for those democratic values and freedoms overcome sometimes linguistic barriers. And as a result, I have found great friends in the Latino community, and they have a great defender when it comes to human rights and democracy. In me, like I said, for me, it's non-negotiable. It's the most important rights that we have, and that's why I think I've created this wonderful relationship with the communities.
And Senator, what I heard from some colleagues in Toronto, in the east coast of Canada, it's you are very easygoing with the Latino community, and you are putting all the community together to involve on the politics, because Latino community in Canada, we are just like put it on the side, right? It's only the Quebecois, the Canadians, East Indian people, Chinese, but Latino community as Hispanic, we want to be one of those important communities, strong in Canada. And this is one of your specific topics and one of your topics priorities. Is that right?
Absolutely. I keep calling the Latino community Canada's largest invisible ethnic community. The truth of the matter is there's a lot of attention given to the South Asian, the Asian communities, obviously European immigrant groups that came here in the 50s and 60s, and they get a lot of attention because of their sheer numbers. Of course, the Latino community represents very many countries in Latin America and South America, but they have a lot of common values. And when you emulsify all those common values, doesn't matter if you're from Ecuador, Cuba, Venezuela, Peru, Chile, when you put all those numbers together, the community is just as large as the South Asians or the Asians or all the other communities that garner so much attention from our democracy. So I believe that the Latino community has a contribution to make, as they make a huge contribution already to the well-being and the development of our country, and they should have a voice in its democracy. And I've always said to all the various communities that I'm working with, once they unite in a democracy, unity and numbers give you power. So the Latino community, I think once they unite with a strategic agenda, and they engage in the political process, because of course democracy and freedom only works when people participate, then I think they will be the beneficiaries of more influence in Ottawa and all the other provincial capitals across the country. And our democracy will benefit because the Latino community is such a fabulous community. It doesn't matter what country they come from. Like I said, they are hardworking people, proud people. They share the values of democracy and freedom.
Yeah, exactly what you described it, the perfect community in the world. What can I say? Um, Senator, I have a few questions before we end. First of all, what do you think about the liberal government of Prime Minister Trudeau, and where we're gonna be if if pathetic, um, I think we will if the liberals will be won the next election, and what exactly the uh, the conservatives are doing it to try to get back to the government.
Well, the first thing, again, which was stunning to me this weekend, we talked about the Liberal Party National Convention passing a bill trying essentially to censor the freedom of the press. But even just as egregious, they passed another motion essentially giving the government the right to stay, to continue to have deficit spending for eternity, in perpetuity, which in essence, imagine a political party at its convention passing a motion calling for deficits and debt of the country to continue to grow in perpetuity and eternity. I mean, we are suffering through the highest cost of living in the history of the country. We are suffering through the worst inflation in the history of the country. And of course, this particular affliction is touching democracies and countries all around the world. But it certainly gets worse when a government spends money it doesn't have, and when a government continues to borrow on the backs of future generation of Canadians. So we cannot afford to have another 4 years of this Trudeau government. The last 8 years have been already so costly that this prime minister has doubled the debt of the country in 8 years. He has doubled it. He has created more of a debt as prime minister in 8 years than all the other prime ministers of Canada combined before him, which is unbelievable when you think of the degree of economic damage that he has caused in the country. No fiscal responsibility, taxes are going up. He believes he can solve the environmental problems in this country by taxing Canadians to death. He believes he can solve the infrastructure problem by taxing Canadians to death. Every single problem that he believes exists, he thinks if he taxes Canadians and take more money out of their pockets and spends more, that somehow this will create a better society, where what that actually does is create runaway inflation. It pummels poor people and it pummels the middle class. So what we're trying to do, and thank God the Conservative Party has a dynamic communicator in Pierre Poilievre, a dynamic politician. I've never seen a politician so committed to our cause, our values, and our country. He's been traveling every single moment that he is not in the House of Commons, connecting with Canadians, reminding them about the importance of freedom, reminding them of the importance of being fiscally responsible and not having a government that spends more money than it can, getting inflation under control, and rebuilding confidence in our country. If you're a young Canadian, Mr. Chaparro, today, you're living in your mother's basement. You can't afford an apartment. You can't afford a house. You know, their future seems so bleak compared to previous generations. So I have faith that Canadians will come together. Young Canadians are already flocking to support the Conservative Party. And I think many of their moms and dads are going to see that Pierre Poilievre will be inspiring a new sense of hope for future generation of Canadians. But we have to get this government that is fiscally bankrupt and ethically bankrupt out of office.
Senator, before we end, I wanna say a few words. If you can answer just the first word come to your mind. Is that okay with you?
Sure.
Okay, let's start. Conservatives.
Canadians.
Trudeau.
Bankrupt.
Greece.
Beautiful.
Hispanic.
Fantastic.
Liberals.
Morally, they deserve 2 words. Morally challenged.
Pierre Poilievre.
A fighter.
Canada.
In need of change.
Venezuela.
Also in need of change.
Putin.
Bad man.
Ontario.
Ontario. Beautiful.
China.
Corrupt.
Senator, appreciate your questions. Thanks for being here in Canada Latin Channel. Hopefully this won't be the last opportunity we have you here. And if you are okay, we can have a further interview about another topics. I have a lot of topics to talk, but I know your time is very, very short.
I appreciate it. I thank you very much. Muchas gracias.
Gracias, Senador. Thanks, and a big hug to the East Coast there in Ottawa. Thanks a lot.
Thank you so much.
Bueno, a mí no me queda más que agradecer el favor de tu atención. Gracias por estar en sintonía de nuestra plataforma digital Canadá Latin Channel en Gobierno, Cultura y Sociedad, donde te traemos pues información importante que la comunidad latina necesita saber. Así que ya lo sabes, si no te has unido a nuestra comunidad de Canadá Latin Channel, te invito a que lo hagas. Nos busques en redes sociales, en Facebook, en Twitter, en Instagram. Nuestra página web, no lo olvides, www.canadalatinchannel.com. Está pendiente y pues prende tus notificaciones en cualquier plataforma digital, en cualquier red social, para que no te pierdas ningún contenido, porque estamos trayendo información importante antes de que el gobierno pues, pueda ponernos restricciones con esta nueva ley, este bill que se aprobó el C11, que nos explicaba el senador, que pues probablemente vaya a haber algunas implicaciones en la comunicación y en los creadores de contenido como nosotros, como otros colegas y otros reporteros, periodistas que se dedican a lo mismo, pues estamos nosotros al pendiente. Así que danos por favor tu like antes de que otra cosa suceda para que estés pendiente de cualquier cosa que suceda, no solamente en Canadá, en Latinoamérica y en todo el mundo. Y lo dicho, yo soy Héctor Chaparro y quiero agradecerte. Gracias por estar con nosotros y por seguirnos. Y nos vemos en una emisión más de Gobierno, Cultura y Sociedad aquí por Canadá Latin Channel. Yo le deseo una muy bonita tarde, buena noche, buen día, a cualquier hora que usted vea este contenido. Lo veo pronto. Hasta entonces.